In 1970s Soviet-controlled Poland, tensions were rising. The workforce of Poland was angered by decreasing wages and increasing prices of necessary goods. A growing number of protests and strikes reflected the common feeling of the people, tired of the government's lies and injustices. Out of these strikes and conflicts, the independent, self-governing trade union, Solidarity, or NSZZ Solidarność, was founded. Solidarity grew to be a wider movement that represented the ideas of the Polish people and triumphantly strived to shape a democratic government reflecting these same ideals. The Solidarity movement successfully overturned the tragic oppression of Polish labor workers. The effects of the Polish people's stand for democracy are still felt in grassroots leadership and across Poland and Eastern Europe to this day. In February of 1945, as World War II was coming to an end, three leaders of the Allied powers, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin, met at the Yalta Conference in Crimea, Russia. At Yalta, discussions about what to do with post-war Eastern Europe consumed a large part of the deliberations. Poland's post-war government in particular was a topic of conflict. Churchill and FDR both supported having a Polish government in exile in London, whereas Stalin advocated for a communist government in Lublin, Poland. The negotiators compromised, after much discussion, that Poland was to be influenced by the neighboring Soviet Union's communist rule if the Soviet government would allow democratic practices, such as representation of all Polish political parties in free elections. It also agreed that other governments of the Eastern European countries bordering the Soviet Union would be similarly influenced by their communist neighbor. Stalin did not honor the agreement, and free elections never took place in Poland nor the other Eastern European countries under Soviet influence. Instead, communist governments were immediately instituted behind the Iron Curtain. In Poland, other political parties were suppressed, and the population was at unrest as they were forced into a government they had not chosen. In the decades leading to the 1970s, the Soviet Union took more power and tensions within Poland rose. Protests objecting to the rising prices of common goods under the de facto government increased. In December of 1970, protesters were unexpectedly met with violence by Soviet troops. The massacre was quietly covered up by Soviet officials. The people of Poland did not want a violent revolution, but rather a peaceful transition to new leadership. In early 1971, Edward Gierek assumed party leadership with the beliefs that the Communist Party should soften its ideological stance. Gierek used the Soviets in Moscow for loans in hopes of rapid industrial modernization. Wages for workers soared and the cost of consumer goods went down. However, after Gierek failed to manufacture exportable goods, the anticipated revenue needed to pay off Moscow was not generated, and the Polish economy crashed. In response, Gierek raised the prices of common goods, but lowered the prices of luxury goods only affordable to higher-class citizens and Soviet officials. Protest leaders used the ongoing tensions from Gierek's policy and misleading promises to rally a strong base of support for a change to an honest government. In 1979, newly appointed Pope John Paul II visited Poland. Thousands of people gathered around the Pope, who spoke not only of religion, but also sent political messages hidden in his teachings. Because of the Pope's global coverage, Soviet-run Poland was put into an international spotlight. Now influenced by the Pope, the people of Poland had a newfound sense of courage and hope for democracy. All Polish people, not only labor workers, were ready to unite for a Poland that reflected their thoughts and ideals. As the new decade approached, economic and social injustices continued oppressing the Polish population. In the port city of Gdansk and other towns on the Baltic Sea, shipyard workers were outraged. Wages continued to go down, while prices of common goods were higher than ever. In December of 1979, an underground meeting was held by the leaders of the striking workers at the London shipyards in Gdansk. This meeting was the first step towards forming the trade union NSZZ Solidarity. With the Pope's visit still on everyone's mind, Polish people were ready to stand up for change. In the Lenin shipyard in Gdansk, a well-liked worker and leader known for her rebellious attitude, Anna Valentinovich rallied a large number of workers to strike for their rights. By the end of August 1980, workers walked off the job. Former shipyard electrician Lech Walesa, fired in 1976 for union organizing, climbed the fence into the shipyard full of strikers and spoke to the crowd, inspiring and rallying the workers. Negotiations and compromises between the Polish-Soviet government and the protest leaders, including Lech Walesa, allowed the formation of the trade union NSZZ Solidarity, the first independent trade union behind the Iron Curtain. The Polish people's triumphant stand for a country that represented their ideals led to the end of the tragic oppression of citizens in Poland and ultimately across the Eastern Bloc. In the 1980s, a new head of defense came into power in Poland. This government was ready to take force against the rising opposition. On December 13, 1981, General Dworski, the new head of defense, made an address saying, "The crisis in Poland has reached its climax," and declared a state of emergency. The country fell into martial law, and the newly formed trade union, NSZZ Solidarity, was outlawed by the communist government. All television and radio stations were taken over, and announcers read the conditions of the new political state of Poland: a curfew, travel restrictions, patrolled borders, school restrictions, and restricted access to bank accounts. Soviet troops sent Solidarity ringleaders to jails or labor camps. Solidarity became an underground movement. As Poland fell deeper into a state of crisis, Solidarity managed to stay alive, with membership reaching almost 9 million. By contrast, PSPR, the government-run Soviet Workers' Union, numbers were lower than ever, and the Soviet youth group had failed to sustain membership as well, making up less than 5% of students. General Dworski hoped to escalate his powers and draw attention to his quick shutdown. However, martial law failed to stop the spirit of solidarity. As a result, in summer of 1983, martial law in Poland came to an end. It took 5 more years of Soviet rule before Solidarity leaders were able to negotiate a free election. On June 4, 1989, the election results came in. Solidarity leaders swept the board. For the first time since World War II, Poland was not oppressed by Soviet rule. The fight for solidarity had been won. After the election of 1989, when communism was overthrown in Poland, the Soviet Union began to lose power throughout the Eastern Bloc. Only 5 months after Poland's first free election, the Berlin Wall was torn down, and the Iron Curtain began to fall. Neighboring countries such as Hungary and Yugoslavia had an increasing number of protests and strikes against communist rule, and within the next 10 years, the Soviet Union would cease to exist. Poland's Solidarity movement was the first successful movement in Eastern Europe to overthrow its communist government, and inspired many other non-violent political movements throughout Europe and the rest of the world. Prior to Solidarity, the Soviet Union was seen as a power force that could only be defeated with a large government and military. The people of Poland proved this wrong by non-violently creating a movement that stood up for their rights and beliefs. The 1980 protests starting in the Lenin shipyards in Gdansk and the negotiations that would follow overturned the tragic oppression of the working class in Poland. The success of NSZZ Solidarity, the first independent trade union behind the Iron Curtain, would influence movements throughout the Eastern Bloc to stand up for democracy. Other movements around the world learned from Solidarity the power of uniting together as a population and defeating lies with truth.